Alex Harper put up a simple sign in his yard, only to be threatened by his HOA and a relentless neighbor who insisted it violated the rules. Karen, the strictest enforcer in the neighborhood, seemed determined to make his life miserable over something as harmless as a cheerful message. But when Alex dug into his property documents, he discovered proof that the land and the sign were entirely his. And just wait until you see how this showdown unfolded and why justice ultimately triumphed in the most satisfying way. Alex Harper, had spent the last few weeks tending to my small front yard, trying to transform it into something cheerful. After months of planting flowers, arranging little decorative touches, and dreaming up ways to make my home feel welcoming, I decided to add one final element: a large, bright sign that read, "Welcome to our friendship garden." To me, it wasn't just a sign. It was an invitation, a gesture of warmth to anyone walking by, a tiny beacon of positivity in a world that often felt tense and rushed. I imagined neighbors pausing for a moment, smiling, maybe even waving, and I felt proud of my little corner of happiness. But that pride didn't last long. The very next morning, just as the sun began to spill golden light across the street, there was a sharp knock at my front door. I opened it to find Jenkins, the president of our HOA, standing there with his arms crossed, his face set in a stern expression that left no room for discussion. Behind him, I saw Karen, the neighbor who seemed to have taken it upon herself to monitor every inch of the neighborhood for what she considered violations. Her gaze was piercing, and I could tell she had already formed her verdict before saying a single word. "Alex," Jenkins started, his voice low but firm, "you need to take that sign down immediately." I blinked, unsure if I had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice barely masking my shock. "This is my property. The sign is on my land." Jenkins shook his head slowly, like I hadn't understood the gravity of the situation. "It violates the community rules," he said flatly, as though that statement alone should settle the matter. Before I could respond, Karen leaned forward, her tone sharp and cutting. "I've been saying this for months. Rules are rules, Alex. You can't just put whatever you want up without permission." Her words hit me like a jolt. I had anticipated disagreements over small things before, minor squabbles perhaps, but this felt personal. My heart sank, and an undeniable surge of rage began to build inside me. How could they threaten me on my own property? How could anyone claim the right to dictate what I did within the boundaries I legally owned? I felt a mix of disbelief and indignation. Every polite explanation I had rehearsed in my head suddenly felt useless against their unyielding certainty. It wasn't just about a sign. It was about my sense of autonomy, my right to make my home a space of joy without fear of being policed. As I stared at the sign, colorful and bright against the green of my yard, I couldn't help but feel the absurdity of the situation. A simple, cheerful message meant to spread goodwill had somehow become a battleground. I clenched my fists, my pulse quickening, aware that this confrontation was only the beginning. Anger coursed through me, not reckless anger, but the kind that sharpens focus, demanding that injustice be addressed. In that moment, I made a silent vow. No one, not even the HOA or its most ardent enforcer, would strip me of my right to stand by what I had built with care and intention. The morning sun shone down, yet instead of warmth, I felt the fire of confrontation ignite within me. It was the first spark of a battle that was about to unfold, one that would test not only my patience, but my determination to defend what was rightfully mine. And I knew, deep down, that this anger, sharp, consuming, relentless, would be the engine driving me forward. Despite the surge of anger I had felt when Jenkins and Karen confronted me, I tried to keep my composure. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing control wouldn't help anything. "This is my property," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I have every right to put up this sign. It's on my land, not anyone else's." I thought that might be enough, that presenting the facts calmly would end the confrontation. But it wasn't enough. Jenkins frowned, his brows knitting together, and Karen's lips pressed into a tight line. "Rules are rules, Alex," she said again, as if repetition would somehow make her claim true. Then Jenkins leaned closer, his tone sharpened with authority. "We'll be issuing notices if this isn't removed immediately. Fines will follow if you don't comply." Hearing the word "fine" made my stomach drop. I had imagined this conflict ending quickly, perhaps with a simple explanation, maybe even a polite apology from someone who had overreacted. But now it seemed to be spiraling out of control. The letters, the notices, the threats, they all pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. I felt helpless, as though no matter how rational I was, no matter how clearly the property lines were drawn, the world had decided I was wrong simply for standing up for myself. Every time I stepped into the yard after that first confrontation, the air felt heavy. The sign, which had once brought me quiet satisfaction, now seemed to glare at me with a kind of accusatory intensity, as though it reminded me of every looming letter or threat that could arrive in my mailbox. I would stand there, hands gripping the fence, staring at the bold letters, and feel a sharp pang of frustration and sorrow. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, a space where I could nurture beauty and positivity. Instead, it had become a battleground, a place where every glance at my own creation reminded me of the challenge I faced. The emotional toll wasn't just fleeting, it lingered. I found myself replaying every word Jenkins and Karen had said, overanalyzing every glance, every gesture, wondering what they might do next. The helplessness gnawed at me, a quiet but persistent ache that seeped into every corner of my day. It was a different kind of pain, one that didn't leave bruises but left a mark on my spirit. What made it sting the most was that this wasn't really about the sign anymore. It had become a struggle over autonomy, over my right to define my own space without fear of constant policing. Every challenge they threw at me felt like an attempt to diminish my freedom, to make me doubt my own authority over my home. And that, more than anything else, was what weighed me down. I realized painfully that I was facing more than just a disagreement with neighbors. I was facing a situation where my sense of control, my independence, and the simple joy of creating something beautiful for myself and others were all under threat. And yet, beneath the despair, a stubborn ember of resolve flickered. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there, waiting for the right moment to grow into something stronger. I knew this fight would test me in ways I hadn't anticipated, not just legally, but emotionally. Every moment of helplessness, every pang of frustration was a reminder of what was at stake. Not just a sign in my yard, but my right to stand firm in my own home, to maintain the freedom to make choices for myself without intimidation. The night had settled quietly over the neighborhood, and the house was finally still. The earlier confrontation with Jenkins and Karen played on repeat in my mind, but instead of letting frustration take over, I decided to take a different approach. I pulled out my legal documents, my fingers brushing over the edges of deeds, maps, and property records I had carefully collected over the years. Each sheet felt weighty, not just in paper, but in potential proof that I had rights, that the sign in my yard was far from illegal. I spread the documents across the dining table, the overhead light casting a warm glow on the pages. With a pen in one hand and a highlighter in the other, I began tracing the boundaries of my property. I studied each line, each measurement, each coordinate, double-checking against city maps and county records. My heart was still a little heavy from the previous confrontations, but there was also a quiet curiosity, an eagerness to see what the evidence might reveal. And then I saw it. There it was, unmistakable. The portion of land where my sign proudly stood belonged entirely to me. The property lines, the legal descriptions, the official cadastral map, all confirmed it. My pulse quickened. A surge of hope ran through me, sudden and exhilarating, lighting up a part of me that had been clouded by stress and frustration. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of relief, a ray of light cutting through the dark maze of conflict that had threatened to consume my peace of mind. I leaned back in my chair, letting the realization sink in. This was more than just a small victory. It was a turning point. The power of knowledge, of concrete evidence, was suddenly in my hands. If I could present these documents clearly and convincingly, there would be no room for argument. Neither Karen nor the HOA could enforce their threats. The rules they had cited, the fines they had warned about, all of it became irrelevant against the undeniable proof of ownership I now held. A sense of determination began to build alongside hope. I imagined the next meeting with the HOA, the moment I could calmly lay out the facts and show, without doubt, that I was in the right. The fear and helplessness that had weighed on me only days before began to lift. This hope wasn't naive or fleeting. It was grounded in certainty, a quiet confidence born from preparation and truth. I also realized something else. Something deeper. This wasn't just about a sign anymore. It was about reclaiming my sense of agency. For days I had felt pushed around, as though my choices didn't matter. But this discovery reminded me that knowledge is power, that even in situations that seem overwhelming, there is always a way to regain control. My hope wasn't just about winning a battle with the HOA. It was about restoring my own faith in the right to define my space, my home, and my joy. I spent the rest of the evening organizing the documents, highlighting the most crucial points, and preparing notes for the conversation I knew would come. With every careful stroke of the highlighter, with every note written in the margin, my hope solidified into purpose. I wasn't just waiting for the next confrontation, I was preparing to meet it head-on, with clarity, evidence, and unwavering confidence. By the time I closed the final folder and leaned back, exhaustion mingled with exhilaration. The weight of helplessness had lifted, replaced by a steady flame of hope. Tomorrow, I realized the battle would continue, but now I had a secret weapon, certainty. And that certainty gave me a sense of calm power, a promise that I could not only defend my sign, but also defend the freedom and joy it represented. The day of the HOA meeting arrived with a quiet tension that hung over the neighborhood like a thick fog. I could feel it as I walked into the small conference room, the polished floors reflecting the fluorescent lights above. Neighbors filed in, some whispering to one another, some glancing curiously at me. At the front of the room, Jenkins and Karen were already seated, their expressions a mixture of authority and barely concealed impatience. I took a deep breath, feeling the surge of confidence that had been building since the night I discovered the property lines. When it was my turn to speak, I moved to the front of the room with calm precision. I spread the documents across the table, the official property deed, the cadastral map, and the permits I had obtained for the sign. Each page represented months of careful attention, proof that my rights were undeniable. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of neighbors who had watched the conflict unfold from their homes, and for a moment, I felt the weight of their quiet expectation. "I'd like to present evidence regarding the sign in my yard," I began, my voice steady. "All of these documents confirm that the land where the sign stands belongs entirely to me. The placement of this sign does not violate any community rules, and all necessary permits have been obtained." As I spoke, I watched Karen's face shift. The sharp confidence she usually carried faltered slightly, her lips pressing together as if she were trying to hold back words she knew had no ground. Jenkins, too, leaned back in his chair, his posture stiffening, the sternness replaced with a shadow of uncertainty. The room fell into silence, broken only by the soft rustle of paper as I organized the documents to make each point clear. I felt a quiet thrill as their confidence began to crumble. Every threat they had issued, the letters, the fines, the implied intimidation, was meaningless in the face of the truth. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Standing firm, armed with knowledge and preparation, is more powerful than any loud argument or repeated warning. I wasn't just defending a sign. I was asserting my right to control my own space, to protect what I had built with care and intention. When the meeting ended, neighbors approached me one by one. Some offered smiles, others shook my hand, and a few even whispered words of gratitude. They had been watching, silently rooting for justice, and my calm, resolute stance had inspired them. The sense of support was overwhelming and humbling. My victory wasn't mine alone. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of rules that seemed arbitrary or enforcement that felt unfair. Walking back to my yard, I paused for a moment to look at the sign, still standing boldly where I had placed it. "Welcome to our friendship garden," it said, radiant in the afternoon sunlight. It symbolized more than just a cheerful message for passers-by. It symbolized resilience, fairness, and the courage to protect what is rightfully yours. The battle had tested me, stretched my patience, and challenged my confidence, but it had also revealed a strength I hadn't fully recognized before. That day, I realized something essential. Defending your rights isn't just about confrontation. It's about preparation, clarity, and conviction. And the most powerful victories are not just personal. They ripple outward, inspiring others to stand for their own principles, to fight for their spaces, and to believe that justice is possible when you refuse to back down. I smiled, knowing that the sign in my yard would remain, a beacon of hope and a reminder that courage, grounded in truth, can transform even the most challenging conflicts into moments of inspiration.